Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend, I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about how to ramp up engagement with a learning community. This session will be recorded and we will post a copy of it on our blog as well as send it out to all those who have registered for today's session. If you have questions during this webinar, please do use that questions panel and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. If there are some questions that we aren't able to answer live during the session, we'll try to get those answered offline. Also, we're going to be using the raise of hand function in the GoToWebinar control panel, so do find that button and be ready when we ask for it. All right, so to talk to us about a learning community, we have Kristian Spring, one of our amazing instructional designers with us today. Thanks for your time and efforts here, and a lot of research that I'm sure we're going to hear about that you've done as well. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Kristian.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So this session today is, of course, about ramping up engagement with the learning community, and I'll start out by sharing some research that I did for my dissertation. And so kind of just as a precursor to that, it's all original research and it's not published yet because it's pretty recent. But I did collect it all. And then after we go through that, I'll be sharing some ideas about how we can apply the principles that came out of this research to e-learning. So can I get a show of hands? I think Andrew will help with that, but can I get a show of hands? How many people here are engaged in academic work, designing for universities or other K-12 contexts, I guess?
So let us know if you are in the academic circle. And Kristian, for one reason or another, we're getting a lot of digital feedback. Do you have a cell phone that's close by?
Yes, let me throw it far away, see if that helps.
See if that helps at all. So go ahead and raise your hand if you're in an academic circle, and it looks like most of you have already done that. So it looks like we got about 15% of our audience is in that sector.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. I think we're back online, and hopefully the audio quality is a little better for you. But so let's jump right in. So first of all, when you talk about engagement, you kind of have to start by talking about what engagement is. I think most people think about engagement, kind of know what engagement is. If you're engaged in the academic community at all, or the academic discussion around engagement, it's very fraught. There are probably as many definitions of engagement as there are researchers about engagement, but at the same time, we know that it's very important. The Sinatra and co-authors call engagement the holy grail of learning. And as educators, we know how important it is that people are engaged, whatever engaged means. There's kind of the most commonly accepted view is the ABC of engagement, the affective engagement. How do they feel? Are they happy? Do they enjoy learning this information, or are they hating it and waiting for it to be over? The B, behavioral. Are they showing up? Are they doing what they're supposed to do, which is kind of the lowest level of engagement? Like, are they sitting in their desk or not? And then C, the cognitive, which is often the center, and for good reason, but the do they understand? Are they learning what they're supposed to learn? But because cognitive is so important and so much easier to measure than affective, it kind of often overshadows the affective. And I would argue that if people learn something but they hate the topic and hate to think about it afterwards, that's not a success. So with that in mind, I am looking at both the are they learning and the affective, are they happy, essentially. And then, so just to kind of set the stage of this context, the data was collected in a blended learning context. And again, if you're engaged in learning, you probably know what blended learning is. It's a big buzzword right now. For the last 10 years or so, it's been getting more and more popular. And there's a lot of definition of blended learning too. But the basic elements of blended learning are that there's a face-to-face component where at some point you're in a room with somebody else And there's an online component where at some point you are not in a room with somebody else and you're learning. And there are a lot of ways to do blended learning. There's a lot of successful ways to do blended learning. There's not just one way. But I would argue again that to be really successful in blended learning, you have to take the things online that make sense to take online, and keep the things offline that make sense to keep offline. And when we take things online that we can, which are a huge portion of the learning experience, then we free up this time, this budget, this space for really digging in person for the things that only in person can do. And of course, in e-learning, that's especially difficult because if you are off designing the e-learning, you don't often get a lot to say about whether there is a face-to-face or what happens in the face-to-face. But there are a lot of ways that e-learning can enhance a face-to-face experience. And even if all the learning that that your learners are doing or that you have any control over is happening via e-learning, they're of course still having a face-to-face experience with their coworkers, with their bosses, with their work. And even if those are not formal learning experiences, of course the point of any learning experience is to influence the people as they go forth and do their jobs. So let me give you some background about this research. It was a pretty intense learning experience, and I get another thing is that I collected it on a site with a university that's conducting this blended learning experience, but they asked to remain anonymous in the report. So I will not talk about them specifically, but instead kind of talk about the generalities of how everything is set up. So first of all, people are learning, and they have this blended experience where they have I don't know if you can see my cursor, but they have an in-person community, and they go for a year, and they meet each week, and they help each other learn, they support each other, et cetera, the same group of face-to-face people. And then while they're doing that, they're taking 3 separate classes online. And those classes are with any number of random online people, and on 3 separate topics. Each semester they switch teachers. It's a whole new batch of people. It's a whole new experience. And of course, everybody has this kind of outside support, friends and family, that they may also be relying on at this time. Most of these learners are adults, non-traditional, who are going back to school after they have been in careers for a while or raised their families or both. But then there are also younger people who, for whatever reason, traditional learning didn't work for them, and so they're here in this other program. And then at the end of this year, if they performed well enough and the bar is not that high, if they've showed up, if they've done their work, then they can matriculate into this online university, at which point the in-person gathering goes away, and they're just in as many online classes as they feel like they can take. And the university approached my team to do this research because they were finding anecdotally that people were using words like family and warm and community to describe this first experience that they have over a year. And then they were once they matriculated, they were using words like cold and alone. And that's obviously not what they're going for. And of course, online learning is hard. And we know that those who are most successful at it are usually the most motivated students, but they're here trying to serve this demographic of students that have had a hard time with traditional education in the first place, and then to throw them into online learning, which is even harder than traditional education in a lot of ways, is difficult. And a lot of people are struggling. They're not happy. Their affective experience is not as good as it was to begin with, and as a result, they're having a difficult time completing their courses. So I developed this theory, did a big literature review, if you ever care to read that when it gets published, about the communities that affect engagement. And so my theory is that people have their friends and family, they have their peers online and in person, and they have their instructors online and in person. And all of this support pulls up student engagement in different ways, and they could have very strong friends and family support, but low peer and instructor support, and their triangle of engagement would get bigger, but it would get even bigger if they had high support in all the areas. So I started out with a survey of about 800 people, and who had just finished who were in their last semester, finishing up their last semester, and I asked them to rate their academic, their cognitive engagement, and their emotional affective engagement, as well as to list people in their online courses, their instructor and their peers, and in their face-to-face gatherings, instructors and peers, and then other people, family members, neighbors, friends, ecclesiastical leaders, whoever it was that were supporting them through this learning experience. And then so they listed these people that gave us a breadth of a social network. You can kind of see this little bitty social network, and then they rated those people on how much they supported them academically and how much they supported them emotionally, to give us the strength of their network. And I will not go through all the details of this if anybody's freaking out looking at this terrible table. But the long and short of it is that both the strength and the breadth of a social network, the stronger and the bigger a social network is, the more engaged the students were. And you can see, if you're familiar with statistics, that some of these numbers are significant at a very high level, meaning that the chance that this is happening by chance is very low. And one thing that stood out was that sometimes having high support in the face-to-face community improved the online engagement, and sometimes more than having support in the online community improved the online engagement. So that was quite startling, and especially because, and quite worrisome for these people and for online learning in general in some ways, because this strong support year-long thing that they do is not really sustainable for the rest of their educational experience. And here, of course, while we're doing e-learning, our learners are not necessarily as at risk, but they're also not as emotionally supported usually. But we do see that community matters, that other people matter. And of course, we also see that having support online, even if you never see these people, you never meet these people, that helps engagement as well. So then after that, I did qualitative interviews with a handful of the people that responded to the survey, and asked them about what their experience was like online and what their experience was like face-to-face. I'm just going to focus today on what it was like online. And of course, bear in mind, this is an academic context, so they have a teacher, they have assignments, they're getting feedback. It's very academic, which is not necessarily what's going to happen in industry, but there is room to do some of that stuff in industry in a lot of contexts. So they're saying these teachers who they never meet, who they have a class with for a few months, they're encouraging. They give feedback. It's thoughtful. And then it's the same thing with the peers. They have a lot of message boards. That's a lot of the way that they communicate, and they're helping each other understand. But then at the same time, and one of the difficulties with when you're relying on peers is that these people have choice, and sometimes people weren't interested. The person I interviewed wanted to talk to other people, and nobody wanted to talk back to them, or vice. And I actually had a few people say, I wasn't really interested. I didn't have time to make friends online or whatever. I have my work, I have my family. And so that is some difficulty, because you put people in a room and you ask them to talk to each other, and usually they will. But if you put people in a discussion board and you ask them to talk to each other, they will if you make them post a certain number of times to get their grade, but you can't do much as far as making them be insightful or making them care about each other. It does, you can support that, of course, and that's part of what we're after. You have their choice. And then I did a second interview a few months later after everybody had moved on to the purely online learning, and they had very similar experiences at that point. They had some teachers that were great, that were having discussions, that cared about them, and peers who did the same, and then of course some didn't. But it was a starker issue because they didn't have the face-to-face support anymore. And then interestingly, at this point, teachers started to branch out, and they did more different things that I think have some application to e-learning, that there are a lot of different things that we don't necessarily think about doing that can improve people's community, and in turn their engagement, and in turn their learning experience. So they had chat rooms, which are synchronous, but you can do that asynchronously too. Somebody would have to turn in an assignment and somebody else would review it, or they would do projects in groups together. Some of them had real-time non-video chat rooms where they would just get together and could ask the teacher questions and could talk to each other, and then they would connect and break off after that was over and continue to support each other online. So it was really interesting, kind of these little pockets of interesting things happening when the teachers decided to branch out a little bit. And then and our findings were in the qualitative mirrored what we found in the quantitative, that some people who kind of had an easy time with learning did fine. It's not like everybody is dropping out, but the people who were struggling to begin with, who were kind of behind the curve for whatever reason, struggled even more when they didn't have support. And I think we see that in e-learning too. Like the vast majority of people on our bell curve are going to be fine, but there are these people who really need more support, and people is one of the ways that they can get that. All right, so that's kind of the overview of the research. I think we'll pause right now and see if any questions have come through, or if there are any questions that anybody would like to share at this point.
Right off, there's no questions here. Would you mind muting your computer, Kristian?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Muting your mic. Great. Okay, so yeah, there's no questions popping up right now, but do not hesitate to send in questions. We'll get these answered if we can. But anyway, yeah, you can go ahead and continue.
Okay, great. So yeah, now we'll go into the e-learning part, which I think is the more exciting part for this audience, hopefully. But if you have questions about the research or the findings or whatnot, we can talk about this later. Okay, if only I could advance. There we go. Okay, so I put together some e-learning strategies that I've used before to help people, that can help people build community and enhance their engagement. So I'm calling this Stop and Collaborate. I did it kind of a long time ago, so I don't have a screenshot, but I did a course where we actually did two versions. One that people did by themselves, and then when they got to certain points, they would stop. And there was a list of questions, and it said, go and ask your manager these things, and the module would end and say, go and ask your manager these things, and when you come back for the next module, you'll need to have discussed these things. And so this is kind of a way to blend the learning a little bit, to blend with e-learning. And then we made another copy where people did the course in groups, and it was kind of weird, but it was like a PowerPoint, but it was better, of course. And they had a facilitator up front who was kind of running it for the whole group, and then they would get to these points and they would stop and they would talk about it all together before they moved on. And so that was a way where we could have a lot of control over how we were presenting the content, presenting it in an interesting way that was more engaging than a lot of just basic lectures might be, and more flexible for people who are in professional settings and needed, they couldn't pull everybody together to have a meeting necessarily and learn whatever they needed to learn. But then there were these other key points in time where people could stop and talk to somebody else and ask their questions and hopefully form a connection with this person they were talking to. Something we did at eLearning Brothers recently, it was really cool. And this, I'm kind of doing these in order of the most to least social. So it wasn't super social, but we made this interactive graphic novel. And the topic is mental health. And so we have Eric, who is having a hard time with with his life and struggling with his mental health, and you are his friend and you're out for the day and you have a couple of other friends that are with you, and Eric says something to you, and then your friends give you some advice, and then you have to decide what you're going to say back to Eric. And so this all takes place in the e-learning, and you go through a whole experience, and it branches out depending on what you say to him. And then, and it was designed such that at the end, should you have a friend that is in a situation similar to Eric's, that you are ready to do that. And so we kind of simulate this social experience where, of course, you're not having a social experience in the e-learning. When it does come time to have that experience, you're more prepared. And we tried to make it feel as real and as social as we could with all these other people involved in all of this changing and shifting around as actually happens in a social experience. So if you give Eric a bad answer, he's going to give you a different response than if he gave you a good answer, and you're going to kind of go off on that path. All right, and then this is more more true blended learning. We've got a course where there's a pre-course and a post-course that are both e-learning, and then in the middle, the learners are having a face-to-face experience as a group. So in the pre-course, we decided to present all of this information and let the learners practice some of the different skills that they're going to need face-to-face and prepare them so that when they get face-to-face, they can spend all of that time actually practicing. They're going to be role playing, they're going to be discussing, and then afterwards they're going to come back a couple of different times actually and take an assessment about how they are growing and progressing because of what they've learned and because of the face-to-face experience that they had. And this is a place where the e-learning is again itself not that social, but it's supporting this social experience, and it's allowing this social experience to brew and have all of the room that we can give it. And then there is a small, this is the same course, this is the post course, there's a small social learning component where the learners will, when they come back and they reflect on their experience and they report how they're doing, how they're rating themselves on their improvements, they submit this information, and the client gets all of this information so that they can track their learners' progress. But at the same time, the learners will get a response from the e-learning course. The e-learning course is sending the information out and aggregating it together and saying, hey, you're in the 80th percentile. You're doing really well here in comparison to most of the other people who are taking this course and answering these questions. Or you're not doing very well here, you're in the 30th percentile. And then we give them feedback based on, not on specifically how well they're doing, but how well they're doing in comparison to everybody else. And those that are doing very well are invited to reach out to other people and encourage them, and those in different ways depending on the topic of the course or the question. And those that are not doing as well are invited to reach out to people who are doing better, to somebody else, to get some tips, some encouragement. And this is done in a group, a fairly tight-knit group, where part of their goal is to build community. And so we're working that into this kind of overarching blended learning experience that the learners are having. This is another one where people have open-ended goals. So they have whatever content they're getting, they have all of that, and then they get to the end and we're saying it's time to make some commitments to yourself. So they make the commitments to themselves to go out, to help other people, whatever it is, kind of depending on the feedback that they got, to help other people or to ask other people to help them. And then they send that information in an email to themselves so that they can check back on it. So that is allowing the learner to reflect, and then allowing the learner to, through the email, to remember what they reflected on, to set a goal, to actually follow through, and hopefully take this information out into their real face-to-face lives and build this community with the people around them who are, if they're doing well, hopefully doing the same thing and looking for people to help or for people to help them. All right, so that's kind of an overview of a few of the ways that we've been doing social learning lately.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had to mute you again. We totally lost you to a bad connection. We're still seeing your screen, so if you can show me another another slide. There's one more slide here. So coming up at the middle of June, on June 10th, we've got ELBX Live coming up just right around the corner. You can still register for that at eLearningBrothers.com. And we'll have loads of presenters. We've got some speakers in the morning, breakout sessions in the afternoon, lots to learn from. You can learn more about that at eLearningBrothers.com. Also, Kristian works as a part of our custom development team. If you have custom work that you'd like us to help with, even if that's just helping you finish a project that you're already working on, you just need some extra hands, or if you need someone to take on an entire project, we're happy to help with you. Help you with that. We'd also love to take a look at your projects and see if we can give you some advice, or take a look at that and see how we can help you with any projects that you have. So if you'd like a consulting or any sort of custom work, give us a call. The number's there on the screen, 801-796-2767. And as always, if you go to eLearningBrothers.com, we also have a custom section there. So thanks everybody for joining us. We apologize for these technical difficulties. We'll get this fixed and published for you guys later. Thanks. Have a good one.